We are often asked to choose tradition or modernity, as if they stand on opposite sides of a room, arms folded, waiting for us to pick one and walk away from the other. These questions arrive early in life, quietly shaping our choices. What we wear, how we speak, what we value. The world nudges us toward a decision, even when we feel unsure why one must exclude the other. But everyday life tells a different story. A grandmother checking messages on a smartphone. A festival live-streamed on social media. Old songs played through new speakers, filling familiar rooms with slightly altered echoes. We move between these spaces without announcement. Morning prayers followed by office meetings. Handwritten habits surviving inside digital calendars. No inner conflict, no dramatic shift, just small adjustments that feel natural, almost unnoticed. Perhaps tradition and modernity are not rivals at all. Perhaps they share the same streets, the same homes, the same minds. One does not erase the other. They pass each other daily, exchanging quiet glances. Tonight, let us sit with that ordinary closeness, not to judge, not to resolve, only to listen to how life carries both forward, side by side, unannounced and still breathing together. When we speak of tradition in India, we rarely mean a single thing. It lives in customs repeated without discussion, in rituals learned by watching, in gestures passed down before they were ever explained. Tradition sits quietly inside family routines. Who eats first? Who serves whom? When silence is expected. These patterns feel natural until we notice how differently another household arranges the same moments. Language carries tradition in subtle ways. Words used only at home. Accents softened or sharpened by place. Even the decision to switch languages mid-sentence holds histories we seldom pause to examine. Food remembers what we forget. Recipes altered by availability, time, and mood, yet still called ours. A dish tastes familiar not because it is unchanged, but because it has changed with us. Rituals are often practical before they are sacred. They organize time, mark transitions, and offer pauses in busy lives. Many survive not through belief alone, but through repetition and convenience. Memory does much of the work tradition claims. Stories retold until edges blur. Mistakes quietly corrected. As the saying goes, Niya purana banta hai, purana naya banta rehta hai. Tradition, then, is not a museum piece. It is uneven, sometimes burdensome, sometimes comforting. It stays alive because people adapt it daily, not because it remains untouched. When modernity entered Indian life, it did not announce itself loudly. It arrived through schools, forms, timetables, and examinations, quietly rearranging how people imagine progress, success, and the future. Education became a doorway many stepped through with hope, not just for knowledge, but for movement, between villages and cities, between generations, between inherited roles and chosen paths. Science entered everyday language through medicine, measurement, and proof. It promised solutions, but also demanded trust. People learned to balance inherited wisdom with new explanations, often without fully abandoning either. Industry changed the rhythm of work. Factories, offices, and shifts replaced seasonal cycles for many. Time became something counted, managed, and negotiated, not only experience. Cities grew as magnets of possibility. They offered anonymity, income, and exposure. They also brought crowding, fatigue, and new inequalities, teaching people that aspiration always carries a cost. Ideas of rights slowly shaped expectations. Who could speak? Who could study? Who could choose? These ideas traveled unevenly, arriving sooner for some, later for others. Indian modernity was never a clean break. It layered itself over existing lives, adapting, resisting, and adjusting. For most people, it became a patchwork, uneven, incomplete, but deeply woven into everyday hope. Long before independence, questions of tradition and change were already being asked. They surfaced in courts, classrooms, prayer halls, and pamphlets, where people debated what should endure and what could be re-examined. Social customs became sites of argument. Marriage, inheritance, education, and caste practices were discussed openly, sometimes uncomfortably. Change did not arrive as rejection, but as negotiation, often framed as correction rather than rupture. Reform movements emerged from within society itself. They spoke the language of conscience and improvement, not abandonment. Many reformers argued that tradition could be strengthened by questioning its rigid edges. Print culture widened the conversations. Newspapers, tracts, and translations carried ideas across regions. Arguments, once local, became public, allowing disagreement to travel faster than consensus. Education played a quiet but decisive role. Schools introduced new subjects, methods, and ambitions. Yet students returned home daily, moving between old expectations and unfamiliar possibilities. Religious thought also shifted during this period. Interpretation became as important as ritual. Faith was not discarded, but discussed, defended, and sometimes reshaped to meet changing moral concerns. These debates were rarely neat or unified. They unfolded unevenly, shaped by region, class, and access. Progress for some felt threatening to others, creating overlapping timelines of change. By the time independence arrived, tradition and modernity were already intertwined. They had argued, adjusted, and learned to coexist, setting the stage for a nation still negotiating both. After independence, modern institutions did not replace older ways overnight. They settled into an already crowded social landscape, learning to function alongside customs, hierarchies, and habits that had long shaped everyday life. Democracy entered homes through elections and conversations. People queued to vote, then returned to family councils and community elders. The ballot did not erase tradition. It simply added another voice to the room. The Constitution spoke in a new register. It promised justice, liberty, equality. These words sounded formal, even distant, yet they slowly filtered into expectations, arguments, and quiet demands within ordinary lives. Education expanded as a national project. Schools and universities multiplied, carrying ideas of merit and opportunity. At the same time, family background and social networks continued to influence who could truly benefit. Planning and development reshaped landscapes. Dams, factories, and housing colonies appeared beside temples, farms, and bazaars. The future was being designed, even as older rhythms refused to disappear. Rights were discussed in public language, but lived privately. People learned to speak of equality while navigating unequal homes. Change became a slow negotiation between promise and practice. Modern institutions asked citizens to imagine themselves anew, yet they did so without asking them to forget who they were. Tradition remained present, sometimes obstructive, sometimes supportive, always nearby. What emerged was not a clean, modern nation. It was a layered one, where constitutional ideals and inherited customs shared space, arguing quietly, adjusting daily, and shaping a complex, unfinished democracy. Family is where these negotiations become most visible. Not in speeches or laws, but in living rooms, phone calls, and long conversations held late into the night, often between people who care deeply for one another. Marriage, especially, carries these tensions. Arranged and love marriages are often spoken of as opposites. Yet many households quietly blend both. Introductions guided by family, choices shaped by personal preference. Sociological surveys often note this overlap. Young people may seek compatibility and affection while still valuing parental approval. The result is not rebellion, but careful balancing, adjusted case by case. Joint families continue in some homes, even as nuclear households grow. Economic pressure, mobility, and privacy play their part. Still, emotional dependence rarely disappears with physical distance. Parents and grandparents adapt in small ways. Rules soften. Expectations shift. What once felt non-negotiable becomes open to discussion, though not always without friction or silence. Gender roles, too, are renegotiated within families. Education and employment alter expectations, yet traditions linger in daily routines. Change here is often uneven, welcomed in principle, contested in practice. Studies frequently observe continuity beneath change. Festivals are celebrated together. Decisions remain collective during crises. Even independent households return to family networks when certainty breaks. Family and marriage, then, are not fixed forms. They are living arrangements constantly adjusted. Within them, tradition and modernity do not clash loudly. They negotiate patiently across generations. Religion in contemporary life rarely withdraws from the everyday. It adjusts its timing, its form, its visibility. Belief continues, not apart from modern life, but folded carefully into it. Festivals still arrive with familiar anticipation. Dates are checked on phones, rituals planned around workdays. Crowded streets and online calendars coexist, each making space for the other. Worship adapts to urban schedules. Early morning prayers before traffic builds. Quiet visits between meetings. Faith becomes something fitted into time slots without necessarily losing its meaning. Technology reshapes practice in subtle ways. Live-streamed ceremonies. Digital donations. Reminders for fasts and observances. Participation becomes possible even when physical presence is difficult or delayed. Cultural studies often note this persistence. Rituals survive not because they resist change, but because they absorb it. They simplify, shorten, or relocate, remaining recognizable yet altered. Courts, too, have occasionally observed this everyday religiosity, not as doctrine, but as practice woven into routine life, flexible, habitual, and deeply social, rather than purely formal. Belief today is often quieter, less announced, more assumed. It lives in gestures, pauses, and private acts, carried forward without constant explanation. Religion and ritual, then, do not stand outside modernity. They move within it, adjusting pace, adopting tools, keeping continuity, alive through small, repeated acts that fit into contemporary life. Caste remains one of the most complex spaces where tradition and modernity meet. It persists quietly in habits and networks, even as public language increasingly speaks of equality and shared citizenship. Legal frameworks, after independence, promised equal treatment. Discrimination was named, prohibited, and addressed through policy. On paper, hierarchy gave way to rights, protections, and formal inclusion. Social movements pushed these promises into everyday awareness. They challenged silence, demanded access, and reshaped public conversation. Change here came through long effort, not sudden transformation. Yet daily life often moves slower than law. Marriage choices, neighborhoods, and occupations still reflect inherited boundaries. Surveys regularly show how identity continues to influence opportunity and interaction. Education has altered many trajectories. Classrooms brought people together across backgrounds. At the same time, unequal access meant that benefits were distributed unevenly, reinforcing some older patterns even as others weakened. Custom adapts in subtle ways. Old restrictions soften into preferences. Exclusions reappear as social comfort or familiarity, harder to name, yet still shaping outcomes. Data tells a mixed story. Improvement alongside persistence. Mobility for some, stagnation for others. Progress measured not in absolutes, but in slow shifts across generations. Caste, then, exists in tension with modern ideals, neither fully dismantled nor untouched. It is negotiated daily, through law, reform, habit, and choice, revealing how change in society often arrives unevenly and incomplete. Education has become one of the most powerful carriers of aspiration. Degrees promise mobility, stability, and respect. For many families, they represent not knowledge alone, but a carefully guarded hope for change. Work, too, has shifted meaning. Careers replace lifelong occupations. People move between jobs, cities, even identities, learning to adapt to uncertainty as a permanent condition rather than a temporary phase. Migration quietly reshapes families. Children leave first. Parents follow later or remain behind. Census patterns often reflect this movement, showing how work pulls people across regions and routines. Gender roles are negotiated through education and employment. Women's participation has expanded, altering expectations at home. Yet responsibility often remains uneven, carried silently alongside professional ambition. Generations now speak different languages of success. Older ones value security and continuity. Younger ones speak of fulfillment, choice, and balance, even when economic pressure complicates these ideals. Surveys frequently observe this tension. A desire for independence exists alongside attachment to family support. Leaving home does not always mean leaving behind obligation or emotional reliance. Technology accelerates these changes. Remote work blurs boundaries. Opportunities arrive through screens, while competition feels closer, constant, and less predictable than before. Education, work, and aspiration form a restless triangle. They carry people forward, often unevenly. Within them, tradition adjusts its expectations, and modernity learns patience as lives are reshaped one decision at a time. Technology now sits quietly at the center of cultural life. Smartphones accompany rituals, commutes, and conversations, becoming less a symbol of change and more background presence, shaping how moments are shared and remembered. Social media alters how culture circulates. Festivals appear as images, opinions as short texts. Studies often note how participation shifts from physical gathering to visibility, without entirely replacing older forms of belonging. Cinema continues to mix registers. Traditional stories meet contemporary settings. Songs travel faster than contexts. Audiences recognize themselves in these blends, even when meanings feel slightly unsettled or incomplete. Language adapts with ease. Sentences move between tongues. Borrowed words lose their foreignness quickly. Linguistic studies observe this code switching not as confusion, but as practical fluency shaped by everyday need. Media debates often follow these changes. Concerns about loss sit beside claims of creativity. Neither view fully captures the quieter reality of gradual adjustment and selective adoption. Digital platforms flatten distance. Regional practices find wider audiences. At the same time, algorithms shape taste, narrowing exposure even as choice appears to expand. Cultural mixing is rarely deliberate. It happens through habit, convenience, and imitation. People absorb influences without formal consent, reshaping identity through repeated, ordinary use. Technology and media, then, do not overwrite culture. They redistribute it. Tradition travels differently now. Modernity borrows freely, and everyday life settles somewhere between continuity and constant, unremarkable change. Law often enters society quietly, not as disruption, but as adjustment. It steps into spaces shaped by custom, attempting to translate inherited practice into shared rules that can speak across difference. Personal laws reflect this tension clearly. They carry religious and cultural histories, yet operate within a modern legal frame. For many families, law becomes another reference point, alongside elders and tradition. Social legislation has followed changing expectations. Reforms around marriage, inheritance, and protection emerged slowly. They responded not only to ideals, but to lived conflicts that demanded some form of resolution. Courts occasionally become meeting grounds for these debates. Judges listen to stories rooted in everyday life. Their observations often acknowledge complexity rather than offering neat moral conclusions. Legal change rarely settles matters completely. Each intervention opens further discussion. Questions return in new forms, shaped by shifting values, social awareness, and practical consequences. Public debate mirrors this uncertainty. Some argue for continuity. Others emphasize reform. Most people, however, navigate both, adjusting behavior gradually rather than through dramatic alignment. Law also learns from society. Precedents evolve. Interpretations shift. What once felt radical becomes routine as social practice slowly catches up with written principle. In this way, law acts less like a verdict and more like a bridge. It connects tradition and modernity without fully resolving their differences, allowing society to cross back and forth, testing balance with each step. Moments of conflict often emerge quietly. A disagreement at home, a protest misunderstood, an argument that feels larger than its immediate cause, carrying unease about what might be slipping away. Generational tension sits at the heart of many anxieties. Older voices worry about erosion. Younger ones feel constrained. Both speak from care, even when they fail to hear each other fully. Cultural clashes rarely announce themselves as such. They appear as discomfort, impatience, or withdrawal. What feels like resistance is often fear of irrelevance, of loss, of being left behind. Sociological studies have long noted this pattern. Periods of rapid change tend to heighten uncertainty. People respond by holding tighter to symbols, habits, and identities that feel stable. Commissions and inquiries sometimes record these tensions in careful language. They speak of cohesion, adjustment, and dialogue. Behind these words lie everyday struggles to adapt without surrendering dignity. Media amplifies unease, even when it intends to explain. Isolated moments appear as trends. Exceptions feel like norms. Anxiety grows not only from events, but from their repetition in public conversation. Yet conflict is not constant. It rises and falls. Between these moments, people continue living, adjusting routines, negotiating boundaries, finding ways to coexist without resolving everything. Anxiety, then, is not proof of failure. It signals transition. It reminds us that change touches meaning, memory, and belonging, and that societies often move forward while feeling uncertain about the ground beneath them. In everyday life, people rarely choose sides. They adjust. They combine what works, discard what doesn't, and move on, carrying both inheritance and improvisation without much ceremony. Compromise becomes a skill learned early. Respecting elders while questioning decisions, following rituals selectively, using tradition as reference, not as a fixed instruction manual. Creativity fills the gaps between old and new. Festivals shortened, customs simplified, meanings quietly updated so practices remained livable within changing schedules and expectations. Coexistence is mostly practical. People do what allows life to continue smoothly. Ideals bend under routine, and routine absorbs ideals until friction becomes manageable rather than traumatic. Homes reflect this balance clearly. Sacred corners beside televisions. Family WhatsApp groups alongside formal invitations. No explanation offered, because none feels necessary. Many live by an unspoken rule. Keep what sustains. Release what exhausts. As one saying goes, "Jo chalta hai, wahi tikta hai." Continuity here depends less on purity than on usefulness. This way of living is rarely celebrated. It lacks slogans, yet it carries societies forward through patience, habit, and small acts of accommodation repeated daily. Tradition and modernity, in practice, are neighbors sharing space. They disagree, adjust, borrow, and endure. Most lives unfold not in conflict, but in this quiet, ongoing arrangement that feels ordinary precisely because it works. Perhaps tradition and modernity were never meant to compete. They live on the same street, in adjoining houses, aware of each other's presence, listening through thin walls, learning how to share the night without constant conversation. Tradition does not stand still as time moves. It shifts, sheds weight, and carries memory forward. What survives is not what refuses change, but what learns to bend without breaking. Modernity, too, does not arrive to erase. It adds layers, tools, and possibilities. It depends on what already exists, borrowing language, meaning, and belonging from the past it claims to move beyond. Between them lies ordinary life. Meals cooked, choices made, routines repeated. Here, continuity does not mean stagnation, and change does not demand forgetting who we have been. We may not always notice this balance. It works quietly, without declaration. Only when disturbed do we realize how carefully it has been held together over time. So tonight, there is no need to choose, no side to defend, only a shared street, dimly lit, where old houses and new windows face each other, still standing. We leave you there, with footsteps fading, with doors half open, and with the silence that follows, holding both memory and movement at once.